Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Welcome to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. If you want to learn how to become more confident and have healthier relationships with yourself and with others. I'm Mary Baker, and I'm here to give you the education, the tools, and the motivation to identify exactly what's been in your way and what you can do about it. Empowerment comes from doing. It means truly identifying what's really going on, what's really been causing the issues all this time, and most importantly, the positive changes you can make to increase your self-confidence and learn how to take charge. Now, since I want you to get the most out of this material, I've included a link to some of the checklists to get you started. Just go over to the show notes at ownitpowercast.com/001. Or if you need to do that later, all the information you need is there for you. But before we dive in, I want to share a little bit about me and why I wanted to start the Powercast. I've been a counselor and a life coach for over 17 years, and before that worked in management in the service industries. I really fell in love with watching people grow, with figuring out just how things work and how to work to make them better. It's my dream to help as many people as I can to become free from what is holding them back, because there's nothing more profound than witnessing someone truly transform right before my eyes. I've worked with families, I've worked with children, but predominantly adults. The best thing is watching them grow exponentially when they joined a tribe and helped each other. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, along, of course, with being bugged by so many clients over the years to do so. They kept telling me they needed more guidance, more education, and more support to keep the work going. So in this first show, I want to talk to you about the definition of empowerment. Because self-confidence and true self-esteem is so misunderstood, I think. We often place it on conditional self-worth if someone is a high achiever or they've amassed a great deal of wealth. But it's really about owning the self, owning all the parts of yourself. It's about owning your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, your beliefs, and your needs. Because when we don't do that, we're not being genuine. Our outsides are not matching our insides. We're not being true. We're not being honest. Some people say we're actually being deceitful. I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. So what is empowerment really? Well, to me, personal empowerment is real self-acceptance, accepting all the parts of yourself. It means owning your power, not shrinking from it. It means getting things straight with you, and it's not about anybody else. It's about feeling whole. Most importantly, it's about taking personal responsibility for where you are today and where you'd like to go. Empowerment is about taking your power back from all those losses from circumstances and struggles, even the way you've been holding yourself back. Empowerment is about honoring each of your feelings, even the negative ones, because they really help comprise your whole truth, and they signal you when something's not right. Empowerment is about trusting your intuition or your spidey sense, or if you're spiritual, then the guidance you're receiving. Empowerment is about having the courage to identify why you struggle with what you struggle with and what you choose to do to change that. So empowerment is about moving from fear-based living to choice-based. Now, as a counselor and life coach for many years, I've noticed that there are concepts to empowerment, the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak. And then, of course, clients have taught me over and over again that these concepts are so crucial to feeling solid, grounded, and confident. In other words, nothing really happens in a vacuum. But the cool thing is that once we can identify these building blocks for empowerment, then the natural organic process can take it from there. We can become so much more authentic, creative, spiritual, loving, and courageous. You know, it's been so profound for me to witness the process in my wonderful clients, to see the true, authentic person emerge, to watch them find their gifts, and to see them get back into the world. I don't think there's anything more beautiful than that. But why aren't we all just naturally empowered? Well, first, there are very valid reasons why you may not have felt grounded and empowered, and they go way back to childhood, and they're all fear-based. Now, there are a million ways that this can happen, and in this podcast, I'm just going to cover a few. But don't worry, because we'll be focusing on this idea of empowerment all month, so you'll get plenty of chances to gain insights, to sort through your childhood and start connecting the dots. It's not about going back and blaming and shaming. It's about understanding and grabbing context. One of the chief ways that we can feel disempowered comes from having our thoughts or our feelings, our needs, our desires, or our hurts somehow invalidated by our caregivers. Now, this can be done in very overt ways, where you're told, you don't need that, or that's crazy, or that's not true, or what's wrong with you. Or we can hear what they say about others, which is indirect, or about themselves. Disempowerment also comes from a sense of perfectionism in the family, that maybe worth is outsourced to good behavior, getting good grades, being compliant, always having a smile on your face. The other big way that you can become disempowered ever so subtly is if your family used guilt or manipulation. That way you had to let go of what your truth was and what you needed in order to do the right thing. Now, manipulation is a big one, and it's too big of a topic to dive into completely here, but we certainly will be handling that down the road. So all of these ways can be very, very subtle, so don't worry about that. It'll take you some time to identify all the little hints you may have received. Some examples are, you could be asked, "Are you really sure?" Or, "It's okay, don't worry about that, it's not a big deal. It'll be fine. Stop complaining. What do you have to be ungrateful for?" Another way we can become disempowered in childhood is any form of abuse, be it verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. Now, some of this is obvious, but some of it is not. There are also other traumas that could happen to a child that make you question, can you trust life? Can you trust people? Can you trust caregivers? And ultimately, can you trust yourself? Because all of these examples I just gave you create a sense of shame, which deep down is the fear of not being enough. So when this happens, whether it happens overtly or oh so subtly, when you're young, what your caregivers say, you took as gospel and internalized it. You had no choice, because your survival depends upon their approval. But then here comes the internal conflict. If you metabolized and believed what they said, then you had no recourse then to go against your real self. And here's where the damage begins. This is how you slowly, day in, day out, began to question what you really thought, what you really felt, and what you really needed. Because you could not honor yourself around people who would make you pay dearly if you did. And if you were a child, just like any child, who wants and needs their love, what the hell were you supposed to do? Remember what I said earlier about empowered people not going against themselves. Well, what you had to do was create fear-based patterns to survive. One of the ways you could have done that was focusing on others rather than yourself. Focusing on what they needed, keeping them happy, which forced you to settle for less than what you needed and what you deserved. Other ways you could do that is denying what you really needed or what you really felt. Now, there are ways that this can play out. These compensating behaviors, these defensive actions, are self-protecting. They helped you survive. You probably wouldn't be here unless you did them. Some of the other ways are avoidance. Avoidance is a big one, and avoidance of rejection. Avoidance of not being loved, not being accepted. Avoidance of abandonment underneath it all. Other ways it plays out is playing the martyr, being impatient, self-deprecation in front of other people, putting yourself down before they even have a chance to, having fits of rage, being very reactive. Another way is running instead of standing in the ring and taking care of yourself. There's a natural fear of speaking up, of being assertive. There's this odd fear of outshining as well, because that would draw attention to you. The biggest one, though, is the fear of being victimized all over again. So as you can see, this is just a glimpse of some of the things that could happen in childhood to make you feel disempowered. But remember, you cannot live protecting yourself today and feel empowered at the same time. Now, the biggest problem is that there's so much shame attached to these fear patterns that most people don't own them. They're not pretty to own, and if you don't want to own them, it's not your fault. What I would encourage is grab lots of compassion and lots of context. Think about the places of secret shame that you might carry. Because now that you have a sense of where the disempowerment happens, you can understand that you had no power growing up. Kids have no power growing up. The only thing they control is what they say and how they behave. They have no control over how they were treated or how their self-esteem was affected. So in other words, all those protective mechanisms you had to use to survive are the very things that kept you from being vulnerable. And we can't be authentic without being vulnerable. We can't feel confident without being courageous, which, in essence, is vulnerable. So you did what you needed to do to survive. And you can find yourself anywhere on that continuum of childhood. The key, again, is just to go back and identify all the ways in which you needed to survive and therefore disown the self. Now I want to take a moment and get into some of the classic ways that we can disempower ourselves. The first one I want to talk about is, of course, not taking responsibility for what you feel, what you're thinking, what you need, and your behavior. Denial is a big one. Getting very defensive when perhaps confronted by someone, or when someone brings something to your attention that you don't want to look at within yourself. We can often get defensive. We can blame others. We can be famous for blaming circumstances. In essence, it's about not owning it because we're afraid. So the belief is that our fight or flight response kicks in. And of course, it's no longer that a bear is coming at us. It's actually seen as a threat to our self-concept. We can't handle any incoming criticism because the sponge is full. So we get defensive or we focus on them instead. We find all sorts of ways to rationalize our behavior, find excuses, or give quote-unquote reasons for not being able to take responsibility. But of course, the more we do this, the worse we feel about ourselves. You know how that is when you were confronted and you didn't own it and you felt like crap for a couple days, up to a week, if not even longer. Contrast that with those rare moments where you said, you know what? You're right. I did do that. I did say that. I do struggle with that. And even though there was the initial terror of doing so, remember that relief of coming clean. There's that old adage, the truth shall set you free. So in essence, when we're disempowered, we tend to act out. We tend to have a hard time being really emotionally honest. A lot of times we'll struggle with emotional immaturity. We may have tantrums. We may shut down. We may yell and scream. We may blame, keep the focus on anything except for ourselves. People who feel disempowered don't feel like they have the courage to own it, and God forbid, own it out loud to another human being. But that is the only way forward. It's the acronym for the HOW: honesty, openness, and willingness. That is the real how. Because you can fix this. Because I know this, each month I will talk with you about the necessary pieces you will need to put together or at least to tweak. Because I think that each piece can be pretty heavy, I want to focus on only one of them per month. Now this work takes about 6 months to a year, and most people groan when I say that. But just remember, by not doing this work, it actually oxidizes your body and interferes with everything. A year is going to go by no matter what. My question for you is, where would you like to be a year from now? Now, we talked about what empowerment is not, but I'd like to share a little bit about what I think empowerment really is and what it looks like. So first off, empowerment comes from setting boundaries. It means being cool with, or rather requiring others to have boundaries as well. Empowerment comes from honoring what you think, what you feel, what you believe, what you choose, and what you need. Empowerment comes from having healthy environments around you, ones that are supportive and hold you accountable, but they're not judgmental, they're positive and encouraging. Empowerment comes from detaching from other people's caca and focusing on yourself 90,000 times a day if that's necessary, and sometimes it is. Because empowered people have no need to shame you. They have no need to judge or tear you down. In fact, empowered people want to build others up. They relate, they resonate, and they have so much compassion because they've been there. Empowered people can embrace humility because you really no longer need to be right or have all the answers to be okay. You never did. Empowered people are on average grounded, confident, and less about fear than choice. They know they need to own their own choices, and they do. Empowered people can offer empathy, compassion, and understanding to others. They try their best to make their box more elastic and keep challenging themselves every week. Empowered people try to live by their own values and principles so that they can feel congruent and glued together. Their walk matches their talk, and they can feel good about that. And therefore, empowered people desire continued growth even when it's hard, even when they don't want to. They know they need to. Empowered people often end up seeking some kind of spiritual path. They want to give back. They want to pay it forward. They want to be a part of something larger than themselves. Their focus goes away from surface things and begins to focus on more meaningful and substantive things in their life. So now that we've defined what empowerment is and what it isn't, I want you to take a few moments and think about, where do you honestly see yourself? Now, it's okay if it's a mixed bag, and usually it is. It's okay if you couldn't identify with even one statement. Now, there can be lots of reasons for this. Perhaps you're unaware. Perhaps you don't want to see anyone in your childhood as contributing to you not being empowered. There are a million ways that maybe we're in denial, we're not seeing something, or because there was so much love there and so many good memories that it's harder, I think, to tease out the not so good stuff that actually has a profound impact on how you see yourself and your self-concept. So what I do is I teach people to first identify what areas they're struggling in and why the heck they struggle. So even if you can't find origins right now, I just want you to take a moment and think about where you know you struggle. I want you to look at the mindsets, the emotional work and behavior changes that you know you're going to need to tackle to transform yourself. And don't worry, I will help you really own your choices, because I believe choice is the only thing that will ultimately set you free. So in the upcoming shows, I'm going to be covering these concepts. I'd like to spend about a month on each topic so you can really marinate in it, so you can get a good sense of what's going on and get cracking on changing yourself for the better. But first, let's get really gut-level honest about your fears, about the real image of self that you carry that maybe no one knows about. Now be nice, be compassionate, and if you're in a space where you can do this, I want you to take one big deep breath, put your hand over the other, and place them both on your heart if you can. And breathe out again. Now, if you can, I want you to grab a pen and paper and start writing. Or if you're driving or walking or jogging, just listen to these and then just hit the show notes later. Well, I will have these written out for you as well. I want you to take a deep breath right now and just get as centered as you can. And when you give the answers to the following questions, write or maybe even speak in your head the very first thing that comes up in the first nanosecond. Don't question it, don't edit it. That's your real truth, like it or not. Let me give you an example. So if I gave you the sentence stem, the starter, that says, when I shared my feelings as a child, ... what might come up instantly for you are, well, people laughed, they got upset, or said, why in the world would you feel like that? Or maybe people cared. So you get the sense. There could be 4 to 6 endings at one time that come up for you. All right, so these are just a few questions to get you thinking this week. This is all about creating awareness. They're really sentence stems, and I want you to answer with at least 3 different answers very quickly. And remember, they're going to come up quick, but just trust them, no matter how crazy they sound. Here's another example. If I were to pay more attention to my needs today, 1, I'd have to start honoring them. 2, I'd feel more at peace. And 3, I certainly would be less likely to act out to get them met. Okay? And if you want to know more about needs, you can look at my blog post at soarwithmarybaker.com. All right, everybody ready? Okay. So here's the first one, and I'll repeat it. Number 1. When I was growing up and would speak my mind, my family would. When I was growing up and would speak my mind, my family would. Number 2. when I share my negative feelings. When I share my negative feelings. Number 3, trusting myself means. Trusting myself means. And number 4, if I were to start feeling more confident today. If I were to start feeling more confident today. Now look at or think a moment about your answers. Those were your core truth, unfiltered, not PC, unedited hopefully. And maybe some scary truth came up and it's okay. Maybe it was a mixed bag. There were some not so great things that came up, but maybe some positive things as well. That's usually the case. It's usually the case because if you didn't have that internal conflict, that things are good if I do that or bad if I do that, you wouldn't have been fighting yourself. So it would have been a non-issue. So embrace the internal conflict. It's very good information for you. And don't worry, nothing came up unless your psyche knew it could handle it. It wouldn't come up if it wasn't time to look at it either. In fact, you wouldn't still be listening to this unless you were at least getting ready to get ready. And your truth is the only place to start. Now, it's also normal to maybe have some emotions come up or feel like it's stuck in your throat. And if it didn't, it isn't time yet. Just focus on thinking how fabulous you want to feel and what you want your life to look like. And don't worry, your subconscious will begin pointing those things out. It'll start really showing you the contrast between where you secretly feel about yourself and how you want to feel. So now you're saying, well, now what, Mary? How do I get from A to B? Well, here's where the magic happens. I firmly believe that there are concrete steps to take to get your mojo back. Yes, back. It's there, just hidden, not loved, not nurtured, and not exposed yet. So in this podcast, we're going to be focusing on these principles of empowerment. And each month, like I said before, we'll have a particular focus. Now, here are some of the concepts that we'll be getting into in the coming months. We're going to talk about healthy needs. We're going to get into the huge concept of boundaries. We're going to look a little deeper into the school of childhood and the real cost of toxic environments then and now. We're going to look at all the fear-based control issues. We're going to take a tough look at assertiveness and how to do it. Continually, we will be talking about taking responsibility and what that really means. We're going to dive into vulnerability and shame. We're going to look at your beliefs and values and look at your gifts and your purpose. So keep tuning in to learn more and more each month. So today we talked about what empowerment is and what it isn't. We looked at the origins of how toxic environments can do some serious damage to our self-confidence. We identified how some of your coping skills might be hurting you today. Hopefully, you were also able to assess a little bit and see where you are right now. The biggest thing I want you to have is compassion. Compassion for yourself. This stuff is so changeable, so I also want you to have hope. All you need to do is commit to yourself, commit to the work, and let go of the process. Because empowerment is all about courage. The courage to take a hard yet compassionate look at yourself. The courage to take a risk. The courage to let go, all of which is no longer working. But don't worry, because that courage will come when you're ready. Usually bit by bit, day by day, week by week. Because each step begets another. Empowerment comes from doing. Every time you choose, you become more confident, even if you're scared as hell. Well, thank you for joining me today in this very important conversation. And don't worry, we're just getting started. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And if you know anyone else who could benefit from listening, please get the word out and pass it along, as well as leaving us a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever platform that you're using. So go out there, pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and really embrace the journey. See you next week.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you could begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.